said it was for my own good, a way to keep me grounded, grateful, and entirely dependent. What she really wanted was to keep me controlled. For months, I endured the isolation, the quiet cruelties, and the manipulation, believing I had to stay for the sake of my family. But the night she took things too far, I found myself limping down a dark, empty road in the freezing cold, clutching my crying baby tightly against my chest. My hands were numb, my spirit was broken, and I felt completely invisible. Then, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A familiar truck pulled over, and my dad stepped out. He took one look at my bruised ankle and my shivering child, and his face turned to pure stone. He opened the passenger door and said, "Get in. This ends tonight." My name is Amber, and at 27 years old, I learned exactly how dangerous it is to mistake a predator's cage for a sanctuary. 6 months ago, if you had told me I would end up trapped, isolated, and stripped of my basic independence, I would have laughed. I was a self-sufficient woman. I had a fulfilling career, a beautiful newborn daughter, and a reliable SUV that I bought and paid for entirely with my own hard-earned money. But life changes fast when you have a baby, and pressure from the people you are supposed to trust can cloud your best judgment. When my husband, Julian, suggested we temporarily move into his mother's sprawling estate in the countryside to save up for a down payment on our forever home, it felt like a logical, mature decision. His mother, Beatrice, practically begged us to come. She painted a picture of a blissful, supportive family environment where she could help me navigate the exhausting early days of motherhood. But the moment we unpacked our bags, the welcoming smiles vanished. The atmosphere shifted from warm hospitality to a deeply suffocating regime. Beatrice's estate wasn't a gift. It was a fortress designed to isolate me. She began micromanaging how I fed my baby, when I slept, and how I spoke. Slowly, systematically, she began chipping away at my confidence, turning my own husband against me until I felt like a completely unwelcome employee in a house where I was supposed to be family. The shift from psychological control to physical captivity happened on a Tuesday morning. Julian came into our bedroom, avoiding my eyes, and nervously explained that his sedan's transmission was completely shot. Before I could even offer to let him drive my SUV to work, Beatrice materialized in the doorway like a shadow. She didn't ask, she demanded. With a cold, tight smile, she told me that since Julian was the primary breadwinner, he would be taking my keys from now on. When I protested, pointing out that my car was my personal property, Beatrice's voice turned to ice. She condescendingly stated that a mother with a newborn had absolutely no business driving around the countryside anyway, and that it was safer for the baby if I stayed grounded. I turned to Julian, expecting him to stand up for me, to defend his wife. Instead, he just looked at the floor, his passivity wrapped in false concern. He muttered that his mother was right, that I was being overly dramatic, and that we needed to make sacrifices for the family. In that devastating moment, I watched my husband hand my keys over to his mother. Beatrice slid them into her pocket with a look of pure triumph. The agonizing realization settled deep in my chest. I was completely trapped. Without my car, I was utterly cut off from the outside world, marooned in an isolated estate miles away from anyone who cared about me. I wasn't being treated as a daughter-in-law. I was a prisoner. The breaking point arrived 2 weeks later, shattering whatever illusion of peace I had left. I walked into the nursery and found Beatrice casually rifling through my personal financial folders and my daughter's premium baby formulas, rearranging things to suit her whims. When I firmly told her to stop, she turned around with a look of pure disgust. I explained that my daughter had a routine pediatrician appointment that afternoon and demanded she hand over my SUV keys immediately. Beatrice didn't even blink. Instead, she stepped closer and delivered a cold, patronizing speech that made my blood run cold. She told me that I didn't know what was best for my own child, that she would decide when the baby saw a doctor, and that I should be deeply grateful they even allowed me to live under their roof. Rage and panic surged through me. I yelled for Julian, but when he walked into the room, he simply stood by his mother's side like a loyal lieutenant, telling me to calm down and stop causing a scene. Disgusted and desperate, I grabbed my diaper bag and turned to storm down the hallway. In my blinded, tearful state, I didn't see the heavy wooden toy block Beatrice had left right at the top of the stairs. My foot caught the edge, and I went crashing down, twisting my ankle with a sickening pop. The pain was immediate and blinding. I sat at the bottom of the steps, clutching my throbbing ankle, tears streaming down my face. Instead of rushing to help me or calling an ambulance, Julian and Beatrice simply stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with cold indifference. Beatrice sighed, muttered that I was being pathetic, and they both walked away, leaving me to nurse my injury alone in the dark hallway. The blinding pain in my ankle was nothing compared to the cold horror of realizing my husband had completely abandoned me to his mother's cruelty. I knew then that if I stayed in that house another night, they would completely erase whatever was left of my spirit. Driven by pure maternal instinct, I waited until the house went entirely quiet. Moving with agonizing slowness, I packed a small diaper bag, quietly lifted my shivering baby into my arms, and slipped out into the freezing night air. The moment I stepped past the estate gates, the harsh reality of my situation hit me. I was completely on foot, miles away from the nearest town, with no working phone because Beatrice had blocked my service. Every single step down that pitch-black country road was pure physical agony. My twisted ankle throbbed aggressively, shooting sharp pains up my leg every time my foot pressed against the gravel. The wind howled around us, and I wrapped my coat tighter around my daughter, burying her face against my chest to shield her from the biting cold. My hands grew completely numb, my tears froze on my cheeks, and a crushing sense of despair threatened to swallow me whole. I was limping in the dark, utterly isolated and broken, looking exactly like a ghost haunted by the family who was supposed to love her. I had never felt so entirely invisible or helpless in my entire life, praying for a miracle on an empty road. I had been limping through the pitch-black darkness for what felt like hours when a pair of bright headlights suddenly cut through the gloom behind me. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat as panic surged through my veins. Part of me was terrified that it was Julian and Beatrice coming to drag me back to my prison, or worse, to take my baby away from me completely. The vehicle slowed down significantly as it approached, the engine rumbling with a deeply familiar sound. The heavy tires crunched against the loose gravel, and a massive pickup truck pulled over safely onto the shoulder just a few feet ahead of us. The driver's side door swung open, and the cabin light illuminated a face I never thought I'd see on this deserted road. It was my dad, Richard. He had been trying desperately to reach me for days, entirely unaware that Beatrice had been monitoring and blocking my phone calls to keep me isolated. He stepped out into the freezing night air, and the moment he saw me, limping in the dirt, shivering violently, and clutching his granddaughter tightly against my chest, his entire posture shifted. His face turned to pure, unyielding stone. He rushed over, gently assessing my swelling ankle, and wrapped his warm jacket around my baby. He didn't ask a million frantic questions. Instead, a terrifying, hyper-focused calm washed over him. He opened the passenger door, helped me inside, and said with absolute certainty, "Get in. This ends tonight." Instead of turning toward the safety of his own home, Richard slammed the truck into drive and roared straight back toward Beatrice's estate. The tires screeched as we tore up the circular driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate the front of the house. Richard didn't knock. He threw the heavy front door open with an undeniable, commanding presence that shattered the quiet of the home. Julian and Beatrice were sitting in the living room, sipping tea as if they hadn't just abandoned me on a deserted road. They jumped up in shock, and Beatrice immediately tried to use her usual legal threats and arrogance to dismiss him, shouting that he was trespassing and had no right to be there. Julian stood beside her, stammering about family matters and demanding that my dad leave. But Richard didn't back down an inch. He stepped forward, and a cold smile touched his lips as he revealed a devastating truth they never saw coming. Before my dad retired, he was a highly respected commercial contractor. Last year, Beatrice had hired his company for massive, luxury renovations on her estate, and she had never paid the final invoices. Richard pulled out a legal document from his breast pocket and slapped it onto the table. He didn't just have a claim. He held the primary commercial lien on Beatrice's heavily leveraged estate due to those massive, unpaid renovation debts. He looked Beatrice dead in the eye and flipped the power dynamic completely, delivering a brutal ultimatum. Either they hand over my keys and my belongings right now, or he would initiate foreclosure proceedings by morning, leaving them completely homeless. Beatrice went entirely pale, and Julian stood absolutely speechless. The satisfying click of my SUV keys hitting Richard's palm signaled the absolute end of their reign of terror. Shaking with fear and ruined pride, Beatrice forced Julian to hand them over immediately. We packed my belongings into my car, buckled my daughter safely into her seat, and drove away from that toxic estate into the morning light, never looking back. 3 months have passed since that explosive night, and my life has completely transformed. I am currently living in a beautiful, sunlit apartment of my own, funded entirely by my resumed career and the financial security I reclaimed. My lawyers are finalized with the paperwork, and I am officially divorcing Julian, who proved he was never man enough to protect his own family. As for Beatrice, her arrogance finally caught up with her. Unable to pay off the massive commercial lien Richard held, her heavily leveraged estate has officially headed into forced liquidation, leaving her to face the exact poverty and isolation she tried to inflict on me. I went from a trapped, controlled victim limping down a dark road to a fiercely independent mother who controls her own destiny. Now, I want to ask you who listened to my story, what would you have done if your spouse refused to stand up to a toxic parent? Comment your thoughts below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving